it's Savannah O'Gwyn from Savannah Land 2. Today I'd like to share some tips on how to add hand stitching to your creation using lots of different Paper Smooches stamps. I think that hand stitching adds a bit of texture and wow to my cards. And I found that you can trace almost any Paper Smooches stamp image with the needle and thread. For my two examples, I've used regular thread for both, but used two different styled fonts. This baby card has a cursive stamped sentiment, while this Father's Day card uses letters with a straighter edge. I'm going to be sharing tips along the way during this video, so be sure to follow along. Let's start by showing you how I stitch my sentiments and images. So for this you're going to need some cardstock, and I've got just a regular piece right here. And let me show you that on my examples, my stitched elements are just embellishments. And that's because I don't want anything on the back of my card to show through when you open it up. So I'm just going to use a piece of cardstock for today. You're also going to want to have some needles. Now I'm not sure where I got this pack, but I noticed when I opened it up that it came with different size needles. So be sure to watch the thickness of the needle because the larger it is, the bigger the hole. Now I tend to like to use thinner needles for my projects, but for today I'm going to use a thicker needle so you can see what I'm doing. You're also going to want to have a soft pad. The one I'm using today was a leftover from a package that included my acrylic box, but you can use a mouse pad or even foam sheets. Just make sure when you use foam sheets to fold it over in half because you want a thick pad so that it doesn't damage your needle point and it doesn't damage your table. Next you're going to want to have some floss. Now the floss I used was just regular colored floss, and I cut off a piece so that you can see that it actually comes in twisted 6 strands. Now for my projects I like to use only 4 and possibly sometimes only 3, depending on how thick my needle is. Next you're going to want to have some ink. On this project you can see that I use this light pink ink with this dark pink thread. And my tip for you is that you want to always use lighter ink than your floss color, because this will ensure that your image won't show through after you are finished stitching. And finally, you want to get some Paper Smooches stamps. Like I said before, you can use almost any Paper Smooches stamp image or sentiment for this technique. Today, I will be using a couple of images from the set Quick Quibs. Now after you design your card, you're going to want to stamp your image or sentiment, which I've done here. And I said before that you want to use lighter ink than your floss, but today I'm using black so I can show you what I'm doing. Next, you're going to want to place your image and sentiment on your foam pad. And then you're going to pierce around your image using your needle. Now I'm going to show you two different ways I like to do this step. First, let's start with curved images. If you have curved letters, you want to start at the top and place more holes around your image as you go around your curves. So start at the top and pierce down, putting more holes as you go around curves. Now the reason you use more holes around curves is because when you stitch normally, you're stitching a straight line. But to get your thread to go on a curve naturally, you do small sections and you do lots more holes around curved images. Now if you have straight letters like this W, there's two ways you can do this. First, you can just poke holes starting at the top and go to the bottom. Or if you want to match curved images in your sentiment, notice this one has both, you can go top and then continue with a couple in the middle and then the bottom, and do another couple in the middle and go to the top again, and do a couple more, and continue this throughout your letter. Now you can mix match these, or you can do just one or the other. It's your project, so it doesn't matter. Next you're going to thread your needle, and I am going to show you with this orange thread how to do the straight letters first. Once you thread your needle, you can actually tie the end to help it from coming through your image. But what I like to do is hold it. So I hold it to the edge, and I go through the top, and I just always hold that piece back there. And then I usually tape it down when I'm done. Now you can also tape it down now, but I don't recommend that, because as you go through your image, the tape adhesive will gunk up your needle and cause lots of knots with your thread, and it just isn't easy to stitch with. So you can definitely put adhesive on now, or you can hold it or tie a knot. Now you want to start stitching. Now the stitch you're going to use is a back stitch, and this is how you do it. You come up through your top hole, and then you go through your next hole, and you pull tightly. Now the next hole I'm going to want to come through is this top one. And notice there's a gap between this hole and this stitch, so I have to go back through the last hole I went through. And now I've got my stitched element. Now I'm going to tape this down so that I can show you how to do it with the other curved letters. It's the same way. I just hold it, or you can tie it or tape it. But I hold it, and I go through the top hole, and then I stitch through my second one. Sometimes it gets caught on your paper. And I don't pull it as tight. Notice that I can put my needle underneath it a little bit. That's because I want a natural curve. Like I said before, with your thread it's very difficult because it goes straight when you're doing straight lines, and that's how it tends to go normally. But to make a curved thread, you leave it a little loose, and then you're going to come up through your third hole, pull it loosely, and go back through your second one, your back stitch. You're going to back stitch right now. And that causes your thread to curve nicely. Now you're going to come up through your third hole again. Sometimes it's hard to find in the back. And go through your fifth hole, fourth, fifth, whatever it is. Now because I've gone through this one, I'm going to come up through this one. And then I'm going to back stitch, lightly pulling. Now notice how that curves really nicely because of the loose thread. And if you've noticed that you've pulled too tight, just loosen it up with your needle. And I also have another tip. Notice how these holes you can still see whenever you're done stitching. Now if you're using the same size needle, I'll pull some holes right here, and let me go through them to show you what I'm talking about. If I use the exact same size needle as the hole I have, what you're going to want to do is flip your image to the back. Okay, so I've just stitched this, and notice how you can still see those holes? You're going to flip it over and then use your needle to push those holes back in. Now you don't have to do this, but I like mine to look nice and neat. And when you flip it back over, your holes are a little less. And I've done that on these two cards. You can see that I've pushed the holes a little bit around the curve so that you can't see them as much. And then all you do is finish your image, tape it down, or tie it, or however you want to finish it, push your holes back in, and then add it to your creation. Now I've got a couple more examples to share with you and tips. And this first one is for filling in letters and images. Notice on this Quick Quib stamp set that there are lots of different letters that have areas that you can fill in or just trace around. So I've stamped the OMG to show you that you can just trace around this M by piercing the edges, or the corners I mean, and then just stitching, or you can fill it in. Now there's a huge tip for this. When you have an open area and you fill it in, make sure that you stitch in sections. So what I did was I stitched a top line, a middle line, and a bottom line. And then I stitched a bottom section. I went in between my middle and my bottom and I started stitching this bottom section. And then I started coming up here and you can see that I've stitched the top, part of the top. Now the reason you're stitching in sections is because as you're filling in an area, you're piercing this entire piece, which means it's detaching from your paper and it could fall out. So you go in sections to ensure that you're not stitching continuously, piercing it and making it fall out at the end. Now there's another tip you can do, and I used this for one of my publications from last year. It was in the Cards magazine. I stitched my bottom section and then I taped it, which I don't recommend because of the gunk, but I was very careful and I cleaned off my needle each time. So I taped the bottom section so that when I'm continuing this next section or the top section, this doesn't fall out and the tape will hold it to my finished piece. Now, another tip is that you can also use your dies as templates for stitching. This is the Duo die number 2, and I've actually pierced around the image a couple of times already. I've attached it to my creation just using removable adhesive, and then I'm using my needle to just pierce all around this template. Remembering that as I go around curves, I use lots more holes to make it lay flatter and have a natural curve. And if I remove this, you can see that it will show an awesome template for stitching. Now I hope you will try hand stitching one of your Paper Smooches images or sentiments on your next creation. Please leave a comment below with a link to your project because I'd love to check it out. Thank you so much for watching.